Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be talking about basically the general categorizations that a typeface can go into. Now to start off this conversation, I feel like the best place to begin is with Frutiger Scale. Now what you really need to take away from this, it's been in existence for hundreds of years now. Frutiger Scale is all about the measurement of extended versus condensed versions of a typeface, as well as light versus black in this scale, or bold, as we would more commonly put it today. Frutiger scale describes all of those variations that can go into a typeface. So you're going to see, let's just go ahead and use the top left as our example. 23, the lightest and most extended version of this typeface that we're looking at right now. Basically the number in front, so that number 2, translates to the heaviness of that font. So 2 is as light as it gets. There's no number 1 in Frutiger scale. 2 is the lightest, and then if you go all the way to 9, and remember that's the front number, dropping down, that describes the boldness. So if you hear something with a 9 in front, you know it's going to be a really bold font. And if you hear something with a really low number in front, like a 2 to a 4, you know that's going to be a really light variation. Now, on the other side of that number, so the 3, if we're still looking at that top left, that's translating to the amount of condensing that the font is going through. So 3 means that it's as extended as it gets, and 8, I believe some typefaces might actually go all the way up to 9 in the condensed scale. That translates to how condensed it is. So if you hear a really high number at the back end of a font, that means it's going to be a very condensed version of that typeface. And then you can see how that begins to paint a picture for a visual designer of what exactly a typeface the client or your design team is looking for. You know, that you're getting really specific when you begin using Frutiger scale. So certain typefaces still use it today. For instance, Universe uses it very heavily. They have just about every variation you see in front of you in their collection of the typeface universe. And there are a few others that still use it. This has been getting singled out a little bit in recent time. I don't want to say dumbed down, but a little bit, if I gotta be honest with you. I mean, going for like bold and condensed versions as opposed to using Frutiger's number format. So it really just depends on who you're talking to, but it's a good thing to have this in the back of your head. So worst case scenario, even print yourself out a copy, use it as reference. It's a helpful thing. Now, jumping in to the more specific actual classifications of type. Basically, the oldest form of typography that we have on record is what we call black letter, or at the very least that's still existing today. Now, black letter, it's based on middle-aged handwritten fonts that, of course, we're all using pen, so you're gonna see that really sharp angle on, if you want to call them the serifs, they're really more of kind of like almost an ornamental situation at this point when you're looking at a black letter font like this, but they're extremely detailed and they have those really precise edges where it's obvious at the very least it's attempting to mimic, you know, if it was something made in the digital age, it's still attempting to mimic that classic calligraphic pen written style. You're going to see this a lot in official documentation. For instance, the most classic is of course that diploma you got. That more than likely is using black letter as kind of their title section. It communicates a little bit of authority, and it also communicates tradition, you know, age. It's been used since the Middle Ages. Come on, you can't get much of a more traditional, historic typeface than that. So now moving forward in time, old style is, you're going to notice a few key distinctions in old style fonts. For instance, they're going to have these cupped serifs at the bottom. Like if we zoom in on the L of old, you're actually going to see there's a slight little curve to the serif at the bottom. That's usually a distinction that this is a old style font. It's basically a slight change in stroke width throughout, so that um, diagonal stroke of the Y, for instance, is going to be a little bit thinner than the main stroke. Things like that are going to give away that this is an old style font. They're usually made in the 15th to 16th century, or at the very least historically, that's when they were the most popular. So keep an eye out for old style fonts. They do show up in professional use from time to time. There are some situations that you're going to find them useful. Garamond is a very popular old style typeface, especially for that cupped serif look. Now, italics, back in the day, italics were a classification all to themselves. So they were created for condensing the amount of space that text typically was taking up. This was especially popular in bookmaking times where a piece of paper was valuable real estate. Paper was way more expensive than it is today, so for you to be able to condense the amount of space that your type took up so you can have more to say in a given piece of paper, that was crucial during, again, about the 16th century. That was a really big deal. So italics came to be in that light. Nowadays, they're just thrown in practically with like every typeface you have. There's a font variation that's an italic. However, back in the day, this was a completely separate categorization all to itself. Oh, and then scripts. So scripts, you're going to see them most commonly on like wedding invitations, other, I want to just go ahead and put this in layman's terms, fancier occasions. You're going to see scripts come up a lot in those circumstances. And they were based on engravings, and once again, the use of a calligraphy pen. However, just typically a bit simpler than black letter, and just kind of has a bit more of a natural flow, where black letter, there's just so much time spent on the detail of that particular letter. Scripts usually just have a much more free-flowing feel.